You're listening to Deliberate Living, a podcast that inspires, empowers, and encourages listeners to live life more authentically. My name is Holly Priestley, and I'm a full-time nomad who has been living in my 1997 Ford van for more than a year. I travel the United States with my dog, learning how to live with more authenticity. I explore different ways people choose to ditch the prescribed life we've all been sold and live on their terms, finding freedom and happiness however they choose. Hello. Welcome to another episode of the Deliberate Living podcast. I am your host, Holly Priestley, and this week I am here with Kaylee Keller. And I first met Kaylee when Kaylee was Joseph in, 2008 maybe?
Oh gosh. Yeah, sometime around there.
Yeah, 2007, 8, 9.
It was college. Everything was kind of blurry. It was like it started and then it ended sometime after that. I don't know.
Yep. So we've both kind of gone our own separate ways in life, and we're both doing totally different things now than we were doing then. And I wanted to have Kaylee on the podcast today because I think her story is a unique one that doesn't get told very often, and I think that it needs to be talked about. So, Kaylee, can you say hello to the audience and give us a little bit of your background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Thanks, Holly. So I was assigned male at birth and kind of was just plodding through life when Holly met me, and I had been for quite a long time. I guess the backstory is that I knew I was trans from a very young age, and it scared me because I knew that was one aspect of me, and I wasn't sure what to do about it because I thought that if I was to act on it, I would have to sacrifice in like every other area of my life. I'm like, yeah, I am a girl at the time, but I also want to be an engineer, and I want to be a sailor, and I want to be a traveler. And I thought I'd have to give up on all of that and just be trans if I was going to be trans. Like that was going to be all I ever was, ever again. And so like when puberty hit, I made the conscious decision that, okay, well, I'm going to deny this aspect of myself so that I can do all of these other aspects of myself without that baggage. And like almost 20 years of living as a guy. And that kind of was just going, I guess standard. I was managing to check off all the boxes while being internally pretty unhappy with myself and with my situation. And then, so actually what happened is after college, I got the job. I worked it for a while, and I ended up getting sent on TDY for half a year. And the pay was amazing. Oh, sorry. I got sent away to work remotely. Okay. So I was kind of like off in this town with no real like connections or anything. And I was also working like 70 hours a week. So I didn't really like make any connections there either. I was just making a shitload of money and nothing else really. And I like right then, when you don't have like student loan payments and car payments and health insurance payments, like they're not pressing down on you and your view kind of stretches out a little further down the road. I think a lot of people would have gotten like maybe some relief there of having a longer view. And for me, it was just pure dread and terror. Like, I'm like, I don't want to be an old man. I don't want to be a dad. Like, I don't know how to be happy on this path.
So you did all the things that you were supposed to do. You were assigned male at birth. You continued to live as a male, deliberately choosing, to squash another side of yourself. You went to college, you got the degree, you went and got the job, you were making tons of money, you were being successful by society standards, but you were miserable. Yeah.
And it like really, I very much used other people's emotions vicariously to kind of fuel myself, because I had one of the strongest symptoms that I experienced of dysphoria was disassociation. Like, I didn't really experience things for myself, but I could experience things through other people. So while I was away from that, like, coping mechanism, I'm like isolated there with just myself and nothing but the like long view. I was like, I can't do this. I'm not going to survive this. Like, I mean, and I don't really want to, this isn't my life. This is some other life that I'm sure somebody else might enjoy, but not me. And so I got in contact with a therapist, to kind of talk about how I can take steps towards being happy and being myself. At that point, I already kind of like, it's not like it was a surprise to me. Like I said, my story isn't everyone's story, but for me, I knew from a very young age. It wasn't a surprise to me that I had gender dysphoria, and things kind of rolled since then. Like I just kept on putting one foot in front of the other in a direction that I wanted to go, and every step was like really, sometimes like a step can seem really small and the destination can seem really, really far away.
Yeah.
But after having walked in the wrong direction for so long, it just felt really, really, really good to walk in the right direction. Like, no matter how far away this path will take me, just turning and going towards me instead of towards what everybody wanted me to be was, I mean, it's just that action without any like consequences of that action, just that action of that deliberate, like, going towards who I want to be made me feel so much better and has made me a much happier person. I mean, it's kind of I want to draw a parallel with like, with working, when you can make a lot more money doing something that you totally don't believe in, or 1/3 as much doing something that you believe in, and you've just made half of your life like so much more positive. And so it's like for me, just turning was a turning point.
I love it. I love it. A few episodes back, I was interviewing Yulia Konovnitsina, who is another van lifer, and she owns her own companies, and she's a powerhouse, and I love her. One thing that she said...
That is how her last name is pronounced. I am so proud of you. You just like rolled it out there.
It took me a long time. I had to practice. I'm pretty sure I said it wrong on the episode, but since then I've tried. One thing that she said, though, that I think is along the same lines of what you've just said about just moving in the right direction. She said that, she hates this notion of like dream big because it's very overwhelming for people. So if you know where you want to get and you spend literally 5 minutes a day doing something small, something manageable that will get you there, eventually you'll get to where you want to be. But it's that act of like, like you said, walking in the right direction, that really has like a huge mental, emotional impact, if not, physically, logistically, moving you very far. That relief of just like, okay, I'm going the right way. A journey of 1,000 steps starts with the first one. and
I think that the transgender experience is a really interesting one for that, because the first step fucking sucks. Like, so when you met me, like almost nobody had any clue. Like the exceptions are so rare and they didn't really know what was going on. But like almost nobody had any clue, because honestly, it's really, really, really easy to pull off apathetic asshole as a guy. Yeah. Like it takes so little effort to just wear a t-shirt and jeans every day and not really give a fuck. And it's like, that's a whole demographic of masculinity that is extremely easy to pull off. So I was like, I had social armor. Like I was completely acceptable anywhere I went. And overnight, that was gone. All of a sudden, everywhere I go, I'm the trans woman in the room. Or like, when you first start and you're like really obviously not born a woman, like you would expect it to be a really terrible experience because, I mean, yeah, everywhere I went, like I was all of a sudden either really, really weird or the source of all of society's corruption, depending on how far right people go.
Right.
And it blew me away that effect was so much less than the positive effect I had of just having made that decision.
Mm-hmm.
Like I expected to be really, really unhappy for a year while like I tried to figure out how to reincorporate into society as a woman, into a society that didn't want me to incorporate into it as a woman. Like
Mm-hmm.
I thought, oh, this is going to be terrible. And instead, it was the most positive decision that I've ever made from day one, from the like first shitty little tiny steps.
What were the first tiny steps that you took, and how were they easier than you expected them to be?
So let's see. The first step ever.
You got a therapist.
Yes.
Huge proponent. Everyone should be in therapy.
Yeah, and actually, weirdly enough, before that, right before that, not very far before that, but before that, I came out to my girlfriend at the time, and she was the first person that I had ever come out to. She was very accepting, and she was like, "Hey, that sounds like something you need to like deal with, and you know, I'm willing, as girlfriend or friend, I'm willing to help you work through that." And so, like, while it was tough to get up the courage to do it, like people are people. Like a lot of people have gone through tough stuff, and to assume that people won't be with you does them a disservice.
Yeah.
And I found that out over and over again. Like after that, I got the therapist, and we started talking and kind of realizing like, hey, you know, like this isn't like really something that you can come to terms with without also changing your gender identity. Like you're not going to come to terms with being a guy. Like you've tried that.
Yeah.
You've tried that for way too freaking long. But then like, so after that, I came out to my friend group, and I started, and they were very accepting. I can't even explain how grateful I am to all of my friends for. I've had like almost universal acceptance from the people that I've made connections with, and like the family that I've made. I've been so fortunate. I can't even express how fortunate I feel to have such an amazing net of friends to help me through this.
Yeah, and it's critical.
Yeah. So, and actually a friend of mine, Adam, he really, really brought that home to me when I had my, like, it was way after I first came out to my close friends that I see all the time. I decided to, okay, let's make this public. It was actually right after I got a new job, which I'll get to in a second.
Mm-hmm.
But when that coming out post, like it was amazingly supportive. So many people like posted supportive comments and everything on it. And
I think that was in October of 2018.
That sounds right.
So how long did it take you from deciding that you're going to be who you are, and then telling your girlfriend at the time, and then telling the world via Facebook, which is very brave?
So it's kind of a gradual process, but start like from the first moments with telling my girlfriend at the time. I believe that was about a year before.
Okay.
I started seeing a therapist in January of 2018, and I started hormone replacement therapy in April of that year.
Okay.
So I'd been on hormone replacement therapy for, I guess, what is that, like 5-6 months? Something like that. But really like, so what I wanted to say real quick, and then I'll come back to this, is Adam kind of private messaged me, and he's like, hey, you don't seem like the type who's going to like curate these messages. And I think that you should definitely take a look at the fact that out of like 100 and something comments, there's not a single negative one. There's a couple of kind of misguided ones, but no negative ones. All support, even if it is a little,
they're trying.
They're trying. Exactly. Yeah. And to me, the intention is much more important than the words in some people's cases.
I love that. I know that's not everyone's experience, and that is just so magical and affirming that that was your experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I absolutely want to keep like impressed that like my experience isn't everyone's, and there are so many trans women, especially, who have gone through such more hardship in coming out. But I also really want to focus that like the framing of it for me is like to look at the positives. Like, to me, I've had a very accepting family, and I'm like, just in my head, I'm just the type of person who, like, except for those other people, and they don't really matter. They don't count.
Yeah.
So
anyone who is not accepting and supportive, it was easy for you to just like, all right, I don't really need you. And your bad attitude, you can just exit.
So, so what caused the October post was actually specifically the new job, because my old job was definitely not supportive.
Okay.
There are a lot of very transphobic and homophobic comments that were just like everyday banter, you know, like I was not comfortable coming out there, and I did end up getting outed there to my bosses, but it didn't go very far beyond that. Like, I think many circumstances convinced me that I needed to leave that job, and it was also the last place that I wasn't out. Like, when I was out to my family, when I was out to my friends. I guess technically Facebook is the last place that I wasn't out, but tons of people on Facebook knew that I was Kaylee, and I've been living as Kaylee to so many people. But I would always, Monday morning, I would go back into guy mode and try and work out the week that way. And as positive as the step in the right direction was, Monday mornings, I just started crying like every Monday for, that half year of my life, basically, where I had to stop being me and start like pretend to be that other person for 5 days or 4 days, depending on our schedule. Like,
that's a huge chunk of your life that you have to pretend to be an entirely different human.
And it was really strange to me at the time that, like, after tasting the experience of being me, it made it so much harder, because a year ago, I did this every day, all day, like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 50, whatever, 56 weeks a year.
Right? 52.
52. There we go. I was like, that doesn't sound right.
Don't make it longer than it has to be.
Especially this one. This one can end.
Oh,
quickly.
My word. Yeah.
But it was so strange to me realizing that, like, now going back to that mode was 500 times harder than it had been for the 20 years prior.
Yeah.
And I think it was because... Oh, go ahead.
I think that that's pretty common for a lot of people who are denying themselves something that they think they want. And it's like so ingrained in your daily life and your routine, and, your defense mechanisms and your armor are on you all the time. And then you get some sweet, sweet relief of like being able to be who you are. And then you're like, well, I don't want to carry around all this heavy armor and these defense mechanisms. Like, this is shit. I don't want this anymore. And then it becomes, you kind of realize, like, I don't want to put up with that. And but you don't necessarily know how to get out of it either, especially if it's, something like your job that you're doing, that it's a very big part of your life time-wise. And it also, in a lot of ways in our society, kind of defines you. And that's just, it's so much more than people, like, it's not just a job.
Yeah. And it's so internalized with our society too, where it's like we attribute moral quality to people's, like, career success. Like, not just some, like, a ridiculous amount of it. It's like, I don't know. To me, it's never made sense. But I think it's also, I've worn a lot of shoes career-wise, a lot of hats, I should say. I don't know why shoes came to mind. I like shoes more than hats.
I mean, shoes are fine.
And so, like, to me, it's like when someone's, because I get this a lot, actually, because, my current career is impactful, And I'll have people actually, and people will demean themselves. Like a lot of my friends will be working in like the service industry, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, well, someday I'll like get this like awesome job. Like you're so awesome because you have this. And I'm like, please, I did your job for like 6 years and I'm not a different person that way. You know, like I'm not a morally better person now. Like that's not a thing.
Working in the service industry is so hard, and everyone should have to do it for at
Yeah,
least 6 months.
definitely. And I mean, like, I consider myself like, if anything, I'm a less good person now because I'm sitting where I work right now. I didn't lose my job over COVID. I'm not making less money now. My company is taking care of me. You know, like, that's like, I'm not going through these struggles
Yeah.
that a lot of people are, and they're doing it really, really well. Like, people are banding together and taking care of communities right now
Mm-hmm.
in ways that like are really, really amazing, and people in much worse circumstances than me.
Yeah.
So to me, I'm like, I don't think that whole like moral value of my career really balance, like really makes any sense at all. Like,
Yeah. I think we attribute a lot of worth to our careers and to our incomes. You know, like if I make this much money, then I'm a better person. And like, that's not inherently true, you know, or if you have, you know, some jobs over others, like it doesn't make you better in any way. I think what makes you better is how you support other people and how you allow other people to support you. So, you know, when you were coming out, you gave other people the opportunity to level up and show what good humans they are, and you also gave yourself an opportunity to be a good human by being vulnerable and like letting other people do what they will with the information. They happened to band around you and be supportive and amazing, but the fact that you even let them in on that side of you and, you know, like bared your soul to them, like that in and of itself is like morally excellent and totally brave. And I think that we need more.
And terrifying for them. Like they're like, "Oh my God, that's your soul."
Yeah. Well, and then as someone, you know, who's had friends tell me tough things, it makes me feel like, oh shit, now like I love this person and I want to be there for them and I don't know how. I need to level up, like find better ways to be there for them, you know. And I think that is a cycle that we can all get behind. And I think that that's one thing that, you know, this global pandemic is showing people is like how good we can be to each other. And I know that not everyone is being good and some people are being terrible, and, you know, it might get worse before it gets better. But overall, I have a pretty positive outlook of how this whole thing is going to go down.
Yeah. So what you said there really, really resonated with me in another way, that like at another angle as well. Because vulnerability for me has been a wild ride, because not only did I like lower my social armor and become this person that people had to accept, like
they got to accept, they didn't have to accept.
That's true, they had the opportunity to accept. Also, so like I mentioned it earlier, like the disassociation was it was a very integral part of my experience before then. Like things that happened to Joe didn't happen to me.
Yeah.
That wasn't me that was getting hurt or supposed to feel these emotions or whatever, you know, like I basically, all of life felt muted and I was never really out there to be hurt. So not only did I become this person who's much less socially acceptable, I also all of a sudden was my genuine self. So I'm here to be hurt. And not only like in a way that, you know, I guess most humans kind of experience normally, but I hadn't. Like this was a new experience for me.
Yeah.
So being vulnerable, even on the level that most people are vulnerable, was a completely new feeling for me. So, which has had its ups and downs. Mostly ups. I've been very fortunate, like I said, with like most of my family is accepting, including my Trump supporting family. I was blown away by that.
Whoa.
Like I owe my grandfather an apology that I actually think I mentioned to him once, that because like he posts a lot of Trump supporting things, and that's kind of one of their flags that they carry, is that trans people are like the downfall of society.
Mm-hmm.
And he maintains most of those beliefs, but he always uses my name and genders me correctly. And I'm like, wow, I assumed so much worse of you, and I owe you an apology for that. And
Yeah.
it's experiences like that that have really allowed people, like you're saying, to accept me and to accept the real me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's made me kind of feel bad about hiding that from them, because I had to kind of come to terms with the fact that I'd basically been lying to all of my closest friends for as long as I'd known them before I came out.
Yeah.
And I don't know what made me okay with that, because truth is intensely important to me. And so I don't know how I justified that before. In hindsight, it doesn't make sense. At the time, it made sense. I didn't struggle with it on a day-to-day basis. Like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm pretending to be a guy around my roommate. Like, that's not a thought that occurred to me in the mornings.
I mean,
it was more like, I can't believe I'm pretending to myself to be a guy. That thought occurred to me all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that goes on when we are, practicing a lot of self-protection. And so, yeah, we can do things that we never would otherwise justify. But when your life is on the line, and that's probably how it felt, I imagine, it's easier to justify.
That's definitely, and I think that's really, really key. And that's another thing that I wanted to make sure that I touched on, is that like the way I felt, especially like even as a kid, like, oh, I'm going to have to give up these things that are me in order to be me. Like, I don't have the choice of being me, is what it felt like.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really, really grateful to my parents for kind of instilling in me like the background for this, which is that, you have to do what is necessary. And that's what gave me the I guess mental background to say like, okay, well, I'm scared of like everything involved in transitioning. There's health ramifications, social ramifications, family ramifications, career ramifications. Like there's everything is ramifications for coming out as trans. But knowing that I could never be happy that way, like I couldn't just keep on pretending.
Yeah.
I was able to overcome those fears. And I think that that's something that I don't know where people will have to draw that strength from. Like my background for it gave me that. Like there's all kinds of other things that counted against it. Like I was raised super hardcore Christian, which made me have a lot more fears with coming out. But I guess I'm not articulating it well, but I think that you shouldn't make decisions on fear in general.
Right.
Because fear isn't reality. Like,
right.
The reality of transitioning has been positive for me, and my life is so much better. And if I had stayed with letting the fear make those decisions for me, then I would still be there. Like fear doesn't go away.
Right. I mean, if you don't address it, it's not going to go anywhere.
It's just exactly.
That's not to say that you never experience fear now. It's not like you're through it. You're all done. There's
definitely still plenty of fear.
There shall be no more fear.
And I'm not saying not to pay attention to fear. Like I don't.
No, fear is a tool. Fear is definitely a tool. It's not something that you should ignore, but it's also not something that needs to rule your life.
Exactly. And it
did for a long time.
And you should be aware of it, because it wants to fully take the wheel, and it just needs to be one person at the table that you put in its place as often as possible.
Yeah, like it can ride in the car with you, but put it in the back seat. You're driving the car.
Yes, that's such a great, I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's really key. And kind of in that realm, we've talked a lot about the pros of transitioning and being exactly who you are. And, you know, you allowed yourself to open up and be vulnerable, and you're feeling all these feelings for probably the first time. So I imagine they're pretty extreme, good
Intense.
and bad. And, you know, you're realizing how supportive your family and friends really are. And now you have a job that is supportive and not homophobic, transphobic. Have there been any cons to coming out and transitioning?
Definitely. But I don't like to focus on the cons, but yeah, there's definitely some cons. I guess the costs have been mostly things that I've been willing to pay.
Okay.
Like from the literal cost. Because,
Yeah,
you know,
but therapy
hormone
is not
replacement therapy isn't free, and everything else is, and therapy isn't free, and everything else, you know, we have
Your
such a great
wardrobe.
medical system. Oh my God.
A lot of wardrobe mistakes, I imagine, happened
But
at first. And
oh my gosh, it's so cringy. I feel like every trans girl goes through this like hyper femme, everything pink phase, like when they first come
yeah.
out, and then like 6 months later, you're like, I'm going to bury this in the backyard. Like,
This was a good experiment, but it didn't work for me.
I mean, I still have a pretty like femme sense of aesthetic, but it's growing into an aesthetic and less of like a, I don't know, caricature. Like I said, everybody's journey is different.
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest cost that I paid was actually like that dropping of the social armor and increased vulnerability in a very real way for me manifested as social anxiety.
Yeah.
Where before I had always been very comfortable in a crowd, very comfortable at a concert, very comfortable walking through a mall or anything like that. Like
Yeah, because you were armored up. No one could hurt you.
And now dropping that and also becoming vulnerable, like, you know, the quillless porcupine.
Yeah.
Made me, like it gave me social anxiety where I was not comfortable in public, and I had a very hard time being me, or being, I guess, like comfortable is kind of like, I guess it's the right word, but I want to kind of elaborate on that because I was more comfortable internally, but very uncomfortable externally. So like,
yeah, you felt
since
like
then,
a spectacle. You felt like people were looking at you. You felt like you were being noticed.
And since then, like this isn't something I knew about at the time, but since then I've kind of become rather engaged with a lot of the like trans and LGBT culture and like safety nets to kind of try and be there for people who are less fortunate than me. They have a term of like emotional overhead, where like when you don't make a workplace or, you know, a public place, any space, accepting of someone's true like self, that you're subjecting that person to having this like, you know, 20 or 30% overhead that they're expending just worrying about how people are perceiving them and how they should portray themselves, how they should carry themselves, you know, like and it's very invisible to people who are naturally that way, you know, like it's something we deal with in STEM all the time, is that like the white guys checking the boxes who are really happy in that spot don't really realize that like the African American woman in the meeting has like a much larger confidence wall to jump over to speak up and bring her idea to the table.
Yeah, we need to prioritize more diversity, equity, and inclusivity in a lot of our spaces, especially at work and those sorts of things.
So it's been very, very apparent to me that, you know, I went from the first group to the second group, like, especially at first, like day one at my new job was my first day presenting femme at work. And, you know, for they were a very accepting workplace, but I still had that like anxiety overhead on everything where like I'm like, oh, I want to go and talk to this person in their office, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to walk past so many open doors, and people look at me like, who the fuck was that? Like, what just walked by? Like, and, like whether or not that's true.
Right.
I realized that later that like, you know, it's a perception thing. Like anxiety isn't always based on, you know, real things like that, you know.
Probably, I would go so far as to say it's not usually based on things.
So, yeah, it was, it's that to me is the cost that I've had to come to terms with and keep paying over time. Like,
does it get easier?
I think overall, yes. I mean, definitely yes. It's now, I think it's down to, I've realized, I joke now that, it's only partially a joke, but I'm like, oh, well, I've shifted from like trans insecurities to just standard woman insecurities.
Regular old insecurities.
Yeah, regular old woman in society insecurities. Like, wonderful.
You're moving through things at least, right?
Yeah. There was one really, really especially awkward moment. I don't actually know how what point this plays to, but it just occurred to me that like there was a point where it got way worse all of a sudden, and it took me like a few weeks, I think, at that point to kind of like come to terms with what was really going on, because it seemed like I want to say it was about a year into transitioning, or a year into hormone replacement therapy, that like all of a sudden I was getting stared at. Like people would just like give this like shocked stare expression all the time, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like, am I just passing so much worse now? Like what's so jarring to these people?
Yeah.
And like a little while later, I think I was kind of moving pretty quickly at that point. I realized that the longer I got into my transition, the closer people were getting to me before they would realize. And so it had just like, exactly, I would notice their like moment of realization because they're doing it right in front of me, as opposed to like 100 feet that direction.
So your transition is going so well that people don't know that you're in transition until they're like right up on you, which is so interesting.
Which was, it was like really hard for me because I was like, before I was able to ignore it, and like it kind of makes me feel a little bad about how oblivious I was before, I guess, if people were like clocking me from that far away that I didn't even know they were like clocking me. But it was definitely jarring when people started clocking me from like in my like awareness bubble. So that was definitely a time where I was like, what is going on? Like,
yeah.
So
well, especially like growing up the way that you did, and more or less trying to blend in with that like apathetic aggro male, you know, persona. You're like, no one's gonna look at me. I don't want them to look at me. I just want to fit in. And now it matters more to be yourself. And you're like, maybe that means I stand out a little bit. Still gonna do it.
Yeah. It's so I'd say that's definitely one of the biggest costs to me. But like I said, like my family has been mostly accepting. I feel like that's a cost that a lot of people have to deal with. It's getting better.
Yeah.
You know, I talked to some older trans women and like who transitioned in the 80s, and that was kind of what I was worried about. You know, like that's who they were. They had to leave everything behind. They had to leave their family, their friends, their job, and like move somewhere else, and just to be this new persona because that was the only way to be safe. Yeah. And like, so there's a lot of costs that people have to pay that I didn't so much. And like I said, everyone's journey is different. I also see plenty of younger people transitioning, and for them it was just like, oh yeah, I told my teachers and my parents and it's cool. And I'm like,
what? I love that that's something we have now.
Yeah.
I think that's not true.
I mean, not everyone.
Everywhere. But the fact that, you know, that is a society somewhere in America is pretty darn cool. I feel like we're making some progress as a culture. Not a lot, and it's very slow, but we might get there eventually.
Yeah, we'll get there. I'm an optimist. We'll get there.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's great. And speaking of the future, do you have any big plans for yourself this year? You're gonna, I mean, you continuing to do the hormone replacement therapy? Is there anything else on the radar, or?
Oh yeah, yeah. This year, well, unfortunately, coronavirus is kind of messing with certain plans, but I've gotten to a point in my transition where I get to start thinking about some surgeries. So I'm definitely looking at that. So
That's cool.
that was on the radar for this year. We'll see if it actually happens, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just one step at a time. And
Yeah.
I think that I mean, there's so many cliches about it, and I hate like sounding like them, the cliches that is, but it is true that like the direction is so important. And like, there's people who are going to get so much further down this path than I ever will. And there's people who won't get as far as I've gotten. And there's people who will never feel safe coming out, but just like whatever little steps you can make towards who you want to be feel really, really good. I'm so bad at articulating this sentiment, but I always try to tell my friends, because it seems like it's so common in our culture to try to flog yourself into being the person that you pick, like the ideal person that you like want to be. Like everyone kind of has the picture of who they want to be, but for some reason we all think that we're going to beat ourselves into that. And like,
yeah, right.
and you can't punish yourself into loving yourself.
No.
Like, I think that it's so important to love yourself and let the actions flow from that, from wanting to take care of yourself. You know, don't exercise because you want to look like the front of a magazine. Exercise because you like your body and you want to like do positive things, and it'll feel better afterwards that like you'd made that step, as opposed to feeling like, oh man, that was punishing. I'm glad I did that to myself. Like,
yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and we need to accept and love ourselves as we are, and make decisions. Like you said earlier, don't make decisions based on fear, but make decisions based on confidence and hope and love for ourselves and for everybody else.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comparison that might be like it was very formative for me, but it might be very weird for a lot of people. But like when I was young and still a complete asshole in a lot of ways, one of the things that I really liked in Christian theology was that it was brought up a lot at my church, was that like you don't do good out of fear of punishment. You do good out of thankfulness for forgiveness. Is like kind of one of the formative like Reformation theologies. And you know, me and my faith have had like a long bumpy road, but to me that's always been very like a very important distinction, because I think a lot of people think that, you know, Christianity is not sinning because you're scared of what'll happen if you do, and condemning people because they're sinning and stuff like that, when I mean, sure, there's plenty of, everyone's faith is different. But to me, it was very important, the distinction that no, you do things out of love, not out of fear, as a good Christian. To me, that kind of is something that I can apply to myself as well. Like, I'm not doing things for myself out of fear, and out of like this external pressure to be someone else. I want to do it out of love for myself. And I never thought that I'd have that, honestly. I never thought that I'd like myself. And I do.
I love that. I think that is advice that everyone should take. And I think that that's a really good way to look at yourself, look at your life, look at your decisions, look at, you know, your daily decisions, but also your goals and how you're going to achieve them. And I think that it's less common in our society and our culture than it should be, you know, because people don't act in accordance with what they want necessarily. They act in accordance with what they don't want. People respond more to fear and pain than they do like pleasure and joy. And it takes a lot of interior work a lot of people work to be able to like recognize that. Like, well, why are you going to go to work? Well, because I don't want to get fired. Like,
yeah.
I
I don't want to not be able to pay my bills, and I don't want to like be destitute or let my parents down or
yeah, like I don't want to live life as myself because I don't want people to judge me or ridicule me. So I'm going to try and, present this like perfect package of a human to the world. And if I don't ever make any mistakes, no one can ever talk shit about me. And like, that's just not true. And it's not productive, and it just makes you miserable and on edge and tense all the time. And I don't know. I think that being vulnerable and being yourself, like, not only does it make you feel better, but it gives other people permission to also be vulnerable and honest and authentic. So
totally.
Please keep doing that and keep making other people do that too.
Actually, I am kind of done. I decided tomorrow I'm just going to roll it all back.
Go back down the road because I know it's not well.
Liking myself is just not all it's cracked up to be. That would be miserable.
Oh my God, I think that's hilarious. Kaylee, is there anything else you want to share with the audience today?
Oh my gosh. No, I think I've rambled on basically everything. I just, I'm really impressed by what you've done as well. And it's been really cool kind of like watching your growth from afar. And I'm really, really, really glad that you asked me to do this. I've had a great time.
Oh, thank you so much.
So I just think it's amazing. And I think that it's awesome. And I hope that we both continue to encourage people to be themselves, because themselves is worth being.
I completely agree. People should be themselves because themselves is worth being. I think that's so perfect. And that's the whole point of the podcast, is to inspire, encourage, and empower people to live their most authentic lives. And I think that, hearing from a variety of people who are doing it in a variety of ways is one of the best ways to really get that message out there and give people permission to be vulnerable and be themselves.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere people can find you on the internet if they want to follow you or continue the conversation?
I'm probably easiest to find on Facebook, I'd say.
Okay.
I also have an Instagram that I'm trying to use more, but
I'll keep all the information in the show notes as well. So if things do get updated and Kaylee starts a wildly popular cooking show on social media, I'll link to it.
Awesome. Thanks, Holly.
Absolutely. Thank you all for tuning in for another episode of Deliberate Living, and I hope you tune in next week. We've reached the end of this episode of Deliberate Living. You can find the show notes and everything we referenced over on my website, and be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, on YouTube, or sign up for email updates every time something new is published. I'll see you next time on Deliberate Living, and until then, keep your life on the DL too.